One common complaint I've heard amongst people that buy airsoft guns online is that a lot of the online dealers that are out there seem to be lacking in the way of customer service, where they're awfully happy to sell you a gun really quick, but when it comes to getting parts for it, or if you have a question, they're not very forthcoming and you always seem to be kind of unsatisfied with the result that you end up with. Where here at Replay Airsoft, we take a lot of time to make sure that you're getting exactly the product that you want, and we answer your questions when you have those. So with that in mind, I thought today we would sort of step back and answer some of your common questions as to what to look for when you're buying a used airsoft gun. Now, I've seen a lot of used guns on eBay and places like that where you can buy them. I wouldn't recommend buying used airsoft guns on the internet where you can't actually go yourself and personally see the gun before you buy it, because the odds are it's probably missing some parts. We have a lot of used guns come in here to the store where we take a little bit of time to actually inspect the guns to make sure that all the parts are working and in place on the gun. And I have to say, at least half of the time when people bring in used guns for sale, typically we have to do some sort of repair work on it to get it up to the point that I'm comfortable with selling it. So if you can't actually go and lay your hands on the gun, don't bother buying it online. Now, the next thing I would caution you about when you go to look at a used airsoft gun is to take your time. I know it can get awfully exciting when you get to hold a new gun in your hands for the first time, but what you want to do is take your time and look it over, make sure that all of the parts are there, make sure that nothing's wobbling around, that there's no loose parts, and that all the screws are where they need to be, and that there's just generally nothing missing on the gun. Next thing you want to do is just check the sights to make sure that they're attached to the gun securely. I've seen a number of times where you see a gun that looks like an awfully nice gun, but it's got the dovetail sights and you can see that the front sight's actually missing on the gun. So check it out, make sure that both sights are on the gun, that they're in alignment, and that they're actually attached to the frame of the gun. Now, if you're buying a blowback gun, it's important to make sure that the slide is able to function properly on it. So make sure that you can cycle it both forward and backward, that the spring actually returns it back into battery, and that you can lock it back in the rearward position when you're out of bullets. So there are some guns that you'll notice when you go to move the slides that you'll go to let it go and it's not returning back to its original position. So obviously there's a problem with this gun. So check, make sure that the slide does work, make sure that it does lock back and does return into the battery position. And the next thing you're going to want to be concerned with, especially with gas guns, is to check on the magazine. First, make sure that it ejects smoothly from the gun. You're also going to want to go ahead and charge it up to make sure that it holds gas. One of the most common problems I see with used gas guns is leakage problems. So check, listen to it, make sure you don't hear any gas leaking from around the fill valve or from where the main valve is on the gun. You're also going to want to check the main feed lips on the top of the magazine to make sure that these aren't broken. These are little plastic parts that hold the BB in place as it feeds it into the barrel. So make sure all of that's intact and that it is able to be removed and replaced into the gun without any kind of obstructions. One aspect that may be more important to some people than to others is the trigger pull on the gun, where if you're a combat shooter, generally you don't mind a little bit of a stiffer trigger on it, where most combat triggers have a fairly heavy pull to it. They want it to be a fairly deliberate action, where if you're a target shooter, usually you want a little bit of a lighter trigger. So you may want to check on the overall trigger pull. There are some things you can do to adjust it if you don't like it, but it's good to just make sure that it is working properly, that there's no creep, so when you pull the trigger that it breaks cleanly and it doesn't do it a little bit and then finally break the trigger. So you want to make sure that it releases when you want it to, and make sure that you're just overall happy with how the trigger is performing with the gun. Another thing that's good to check on when you're buying a gun is to give it a quick field strip. Go ahead and remove the slide from the frame. First thing you're going to want to check on is the piston on the inside of it, especially on gas blowbacks, and make sure that the piston and the cylinder move freely and that the spring returns it back to its original position. The other thing you're going to want to check is the rails on it, both the slide and the frame, to make sure that there's not any unusual amount of wear on it. Because once these wear down, there's really nothing you can do to fix it, and the gun's just basically junk. So check the rails and make sure that they're all intact and there's not any unusual amount of wear on them. The last thing you're going to want to do when buying a used airsoft pistol is to actually get to fire the gun. Now there's a few things that I like to check on when I'm doing that. First of all, I like to shoot it through a chronograph so I can check on the velocity and make sure that you're getting consistent numbers with it. If it's jumping up and down a lot, it may mean that you have worn out parts in the gun. The next thing you're going to want to check is overall how much gas is it using. Make sure that it's not spitting gas out or you're seeing liquid shooting out of the gun. If it has worn out valves, you may see a lot of those problems, so make sure that it's working pretty cleanly. The last thing you're going to want to check is the overall accuracy of the gun to make sure that you're getting a fairly tight group. Now it doesn't have to be exactly on the bullseye because you can adjust the sights on them a lot of the time, but just make sure that you're getting a nice tight grouping and it's not all erratic all over the target. Now inspecting an AEG is pretty much the same process you go through with a gas pistol with a few minor variations. First of all, you want to give it the same overall visual inspection, make sure that all the parts are present on the gun, that there's no missing screws, give it a good shake, make sure that there's no excessive rattle, make sure that there's no parts that are coming loose, and just overall make sure that all the gun is intact and that there's nothing missing on it. The next thing you're going to want to check on is all the moving parts on the gun. Make sure that the stock extends to where it should and that it locks into place. Check the selector switch to make sure that it moves to all of its positions and that it functions in all those positions so you actually get semi-automatic and fully automatic fire from it. If it's a blowback gun, make sure that that part of the gun actually does function when you shoot it. And if it's got a decocking function, make sure that that actually does function when you press that. Also, the mag release functions properly and that the sights move freely when you go to adjust the windage or the elevation, and that it has all of the apertures on it. So just generally make sure that all the mechanical parts are functioning properly on the gun. One thing that's fairly important with buying a used airsoft gun is to check on the status of the battery that comes with the gun. Now you can bring a voltmeter with you and actually check it, make sure that it's getting you the proper voltage and that it's holding a charge. You may want to fire the gun a little bit and make sure that the battery's not overheating, just to make sure that there's no shorts or anything in the system. But typically, I gotta say, when you buy a used airsoft gun, I would usually look at having to replace the batteries with it, because most of the time the batteries just generally wear out on most guns, and I would just assume get a new battery. If you do buy a used airsoft gun and it has a good battery, I would just look at it as something of a bonus. If you're buying a gun here at Replay Sports, we give you a brand new battery with every airsoft gun that we sell, regardless if it's a new or a used gun. But if you're buying it from somebody's house and you just want to double check on it, bring a voltmeter with you and just check on the status of the battery. When you're dealing with guns that have high capacity magazines, you're going to want to make sure that these actually function properly. There's a lot of moving parts inside of it, so you're going to want to turn the wheel, make sure that it moves freely, stick some BBs in it and dial it up, make sure that they come up to the top of the magazine, and then actually put it in the gun and shoot it and make sure that it feeds properly into the gun. One thing that's important not to overlook, especially with electric guns, is to dry fire it and just listen to the overall sound of the gearbox and the motor. Make sure it has a nice clean sound to it, that you don't hear any kind of grinding or that the motor is laboring or it has some sort of inconsistencies to it where it's not working exactly right, so that you make sure that the gearbox is in good health. If it's making funny noises or it sounds like it's laboring to shoot, you may want to think about getting another gun. Now lastly and most importantly is to actually shoot the gun and check on a few things. Number one, I like to shoot it through a chronograph just like the pistols and check on the overall velocity of the gun. Make sure that it's in the realm of what you're looking for that particular gun, where it's not too high or too low. You also want to make sure that your velocities are consistent from shot to shot, so they're not varying a great deal, because that can generally mean that you got worn out parts inside of the gun. You also want to check on the overall accuracy of it, make sure you're getting nice tight groups for your shots. And lastly, I like to check on the hop up, where we actually vary the hop up settings and make sure that it actually affects the flight of the BB, because if that does not change it, then it probably means that you have a worn out hop up inside of the gun. So that's the things I'm looking at when I'm buying a used airsoft gun. Of course, the nice thing about buying a gun here at Replay Airsoft is we do all of that for you before we even bother to put the gun out into the showcase. So you can be assured that the gun has been fully inspected before you even lay your hands on it. But aside from that, we also give you a 30-day warranty on any used gun that you buy here. So if it develops any kind of mechanical problems in the first 30 days, just bring it back and we'll make it right. If you want to find out what used guns we have in stock, just check out our page at facebook.com/Replay Airsoft, or best bet, just come on into the showroom and check it out for yourself, and you can actually see what you're getting before you go home with it and get the benefit of the 30-day warranty on it. So until then, don't let the bastards get you down.